Everyone in the music classroom watched in quiet amusement as the shy woman walked in, clutching her worn-out handbag and looking completely out of place. She wasn't a student. She wasn't even supposed to be there. She had come along with her niece, who was auditioning for the school's music program. But somehow, a misunderstanding and a bit of arrogance turned everything upside down. The teachers, a tight-knit group of classical music experts, looked her over with skeptical eyes. Maybe it was the way she dressed, or how she nervously glanced around, but something about her made them think she was just an ordinary woman with no musical background. Just for fun, and maybe to embarrass her a little, they pushed her to try playing a notoriously difficult piano piece, a piece that even their most advanced students struggled with. They expected clumsy fingers, a few wrong notes, maybe even a quick apology and a laugh. But what happened next left the entire room frozen in disbelief. As her hands settled on the keys, the room shifted. Her fingers moved with ease, grace, and confidence that could only come from years, no, decades, of deep connection with the piano. No one could speak. No one even moved. Who was this woman? Why had she hidden her gift? And why, of all places, did she choose this moment to reveal it? As the final note echoed through the stunned silence, the teachers looked at each other, suddenly realizing they had completely misjudged her. But the truth about her past, and why she walked away from the stage all those years ago, was still a mystery. What secret had she been carrying all this time? And what would happen now that it was out in the open? The room slowly came back to life, but the teachers were still in shock. One of them awkwardly cleared his throat, trying to make sense of what just happened. Another whispered something under his breath, eyes wide, still staring at the piano. The students who had been watching from the back now leaned in, trying to catch a better look at the woman who had just played with the precision and soul of a concert pianist. She didn't say anything. She simply stood up, adjusted her scarf, and walked back to her seat beside her niece, as if nothing unusual had happened. Whispers spread like wildfire. Who was she? How did she play like that? And why hadn't anyone heard of her before? One of the younger teachers tried to strike up a conversation, asking if she had taken lessons before. She smiled politely, avoiding the question, and gently shifted the focus back to her niece's audition. But behind that quiet smile was a past no one in the room could have guessed. Years ago, she had stood on grand stages, performing in front of hundreds, even thousands. Her name had once appeared on music programs in Europe and Asia, but then she disappeared, vanished from the world of classical music without a word. No interviews, no farewell performance, nothing, just silence. Some said she walked away because of a personal tragedy. Others whispered that the pressure broke her. A few believed she had been forced out by jealousy or betrayal, but none of those stories were ever confirmed. Now, sitting in a simple school music room, with dusty instruments and old posters on the walls, she was back at the piano, if only for a few minutes. The question was this just a moment, or the beginning of something much bigger? The next day, the music department buzzed with rumors. Word had spread beyond the classroom. Students were talking, faculty were whispering, and someone had even posted a short video clip online. Though blurry and shaky, the sound of her playing was enough to stir attention. Comments flooded in, asking, asterisk, who is this woman? Why is she not famous? Asterisk, but she didn't seem fazed. She came back quietly to support her niece's second round of auditions, sitting in the corner like just another proud family member. But behind the scenes, things were shifting. One of the senior teachers, Mr. Levin, couldn't shake the feeling that he'd seen her before. He spent the night digging through old concert programs and videos. At 2 a.m, he finally found her name, Elena Moretti, a former prodigy, a rising star from over a decade ago. She had once been hailed as the future of classical piano, and then silence. Her last recorded performance was at a prestigious European competition, after which she simply vanished. The next morning, Mr. Levin approached her, casually mentioning the name. Her face froze for just a second, barely noticeable, but it was there. Then she gave a small, polite smile and said, "I used to play, a long time ago." And that was it. She didn't offer more. She didn't deny it either. Meanwhile, the school's director, who had caught wind of the situation, began to see opportunity. A pianist of her level, if she could be convinced to return, could bring prestige, attention, maybe even funding. But others weren't as welcoming. Some faculty members felt threatened, wondering why she'd hidden her background. Was she lying? What was she doing here? And most importantly, why now? Tension was rising, and no one knew what her next move would be. By the end of the week, Elena's presence was impossible to ignore. Students kept sneaking glances at her, whispering in the halls. Some teachers acted overly friendly, hoping to pull her into conversation. Others grew colder, uneasy about how fast the attention was shifting towards someone who wasn't even on staff. Even Elena's niece noticed the strange energy in the room. "Auntie," she asked quietly, "did you used to be famous or something?" Elena just smiled and brushed a hand over her niece's hair. "Once," she said softly, "but that's not important now." Behind closed doors, however, a storm was brewing. The school director had called an emergency faculty meeting. He proposed offering Elena a guest position to lead a masterclass or maybe even perform at the upcoming winter recital. Think about the publicity, he'd argued. The exposure for the school, it would be huge. Some teachers supported the idea, but others protested. They didn't trust her. Why had she vanished? Why resurface now at their school? Tensions boiled over when one instructor accused Elena of faking her past to gain sympathy. "There are no clear records of what happened to her," she said. "For all we know, this could be a stunt." Mr. Levins slammed his hand on the table. "I saw her perform live years ago. That woman is no fake." Meanwhile, Elena stood alone in the auditorium. The lights were dim, and the old piano waited in silence. She pressed a key, then another. Music began to pour out, not just notes, but memories, regret, loss, fire. She knew they were watching. The director, the teachers, the students who had slipped in quietly. But this time, she didn't stop. Because this time, she wasn't just playing a piece. She was preparing to confront the ghosts she thought she'd buried forever. As Elena's fingers danced across the keys, the music filled every corner of the auditorium. The room was heavy with emotion, thick with tension. The students sat frozen in their seats, barely breathing. A few teachers lingered near the doors, watching through narrow gaps. But just as the final note faded into silence, a slow clap echoed from the back of the room. It wasn't admiration, it was mockery. A tall man stepped forward from the shadows, his voice calm but cutting. "Still dramatic after all these years, Elena." The entire room turned. Mr. Levin's eyes widened in disbelief. "No, it can't be." The man was Victor Hanley, a former piano prodigy turned critic. Years ago, he and Elena had competed for the same spotlight, the same recognition. Their rivalry had been fierce, personal, and, as rumors once said, destructive. No one had seen Victor in the classical music scene for years either, until now. Elena stood, her back stiff. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. Victor smirked. "And yet here I am. The school invited me last month to evaluate the winter recital. Imagine my surprise when I saw your name." The director, unaware of the full history, stepped forward, sensing something deeper. "You two know each other." Victor didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the students. "Let me tell you something about Elena Moretti," he began, his tone sharp. "She doesn't just disappear for no reason. People remember." The room held its breath. What did he mean? What had really happened all those years ago? Elena's face stayed calm, but her hands trembled slightly. Her past wasn't just returning, it was now standing in the same room, threatening to rewrite the truth and ruin everything she'd just begun to rebuild. The silence in the auditorium thickened as Victor's words hung in the air. Elena didn't flinch, but her eyes locked with his. years of resentment and silence boiling beneath the surface. She took a slow breath, stepped toward the piano again, and faced the room. "I left because of him," she said, her voice steady but full of weight. Gasps rippled through the audience. "After a performance in Berlin, I found out Victor had accused me of plagiarism. He submitted a formal complaint under a false name. My career was stalled for months. Opportunities disappeared. I had no proof, no voice strong enough to fight back." Victor's smirk faded. Mr. Levin turned sharply toward him. "Is that true?" Victor didn't answer. His silence said enough. Elena continued, her hands trembling now for a different reason. "I walked away, not because I couldn't play, but because I couldn't keep defending myself against lies. I chose peace over proving a point." She looked around the room. "But today, I play for someone else, my niece. I came here for her, not for a stage or spotlight." The director, visibly shaken, turned to Victor. "We invited you as a guest, but this is not what our students need." He nodded toward a nearby teacher. "Please escort him out." Victor left without a word, his ego finally bruised where applause used to live. As the door shut behind him, the students stood, one by one, and began to clap, genuine, respectful, and loud. Elena smiled, tears forming in her eyes. For the first time in years, the applause wasn't for being perfect, it was for surviving. But just as the moment settled, her niece tugged her sleeve and whispered, "Auntie, there's someone outside asking for you. He says he's your son." Elena's heart stopped for a second. "My son," she repeated, almost in disbelief. Her niece nodded, eyes wide. Slowly, Elena walked toward the door, past the rows of students, past the teachers who now looked at her with a new kind of respect. And standing just outside, in the cold hallway light, was a young man, mid-20s, tall, familiar eyes. He looked nervous, holding a small envelope in his hand. "Hi," he said, voice unsure. I think you're my mother." Elena's breath caught. Years ago, before she left the spotlight, before Victor's betrayal, she'd been forced to make the hardest decision of her life. Her child had been taken in by another family while she recovered from a mental breakdown triggered by public humiliation and isolation. She had searched for him quietly, but systems and silence had kept them apart. Until now. She reached for the envelope, but instead of opening it, she pulled him into a hug. The auditorium behind her had grown quiet. Students peeked out the door, their curiosity now touched by something more powerful, a real story of loss, of music, of reconnection. Later that evening, Elena stayed behind in the music room. Her niece played quietly on the piano as her newly found son sat beside her, asking questions about the pieces she used to play. The storm had passed. The lies had fallen away. And for the first time in years, Elena felt seen, not as a piano virtuoso, not as a prodigy, not as a forgotten name, but simply as a woman who had lived, lost, and found her way back. Sometimes, music doesn't just heal, it brings people home. And in a quiet school that never expected it, one woman reminded them all that even the most broken melodies can become beautiful again.